Hey, Mr. Awadala. Now I'm about to do my 25 bones of the skull that we had to do for our lab. And I'll let you show you my list of the bones just for identification. Right there, just the names. And now he's gonna just kind of give a 360 of the room and the table. And just make sure you can kind of see me as well with the whole picture. All right. So first off, right here, we have the nasal bone of the skull. Next, we have the frontal bone, which is this top part in the front of the skull. Then we have the nasal spine, which goes below the nose. This little line right here. Then we have the vomer, which is on the inside of the nose, kind of curves. Next we have, on the inferior side of the skull, the foramen magnum, this large hole. Then we have, right next to the foramen magnum, a little recess, and that is the occipital condyle. After that, we have the palatine bone at the top of the mouth. It's kind of blocked by this little spring right here. And then we have the zygomatic arch, which is on either side of the face, curves around. Next we have the occiput right here on the inferior side of the skull. Then we have the nasal aperture, which is the hole for the nose, which is kind of deeper right there inside of the skull. Then we have on the interior of the skull the foramen cecum, which is this line at the very front. Then we have the crista galli, which is this notch right here. And then we have the lesser wing of the sphenoid, which is this upper part, the curved part right here. Then we have this recess in the middle of the skull called the sella turcica. Then we have the anterior cranial fossa, right at the interior of this part of the skull. Next is the internal occipital crest at the very back, the posterior part of the skull, which is where it's kind of raised. Next we go to the exterior of the skull again, and we have the parietal bone, which is this side of the skull right here. Right here. Then we have the occipital bone, which is at the very posterior part of the skull, which is in the back. Then we have the jawbone, or as it's called scientifically, the mandible, which is the whole jawbone. And then we have the coronoid process, which is this part right up here that points at the top of the mandible. Next we have the coronal suture, which is at the very top of the skull. This line that goes all the way across, kind of curves. Then we have the temporal bone, right here. The external acoustic meatus, which is right where the ear canal is, even though it's not an actual hole in this model. Then we have the two mental foramen, which are little holes that would be the bottom of the mandible. And then we have the lacrimal bone, which is on the inside of the eye socket, right back in there. So anyway, those are my 25 parts of the skull. And anyway, I hope you have a great night. Thanks.